Like, okay, I am way broke. I had a partner out in Alabama at the time that he and a couple partners and I were doing stuff in Central America. And I thought that was going to save everything that was falling apart. Well, what happened, as soon as they got a foothold in something, they found a deal to buy an island, and it was a $4 million profit. And I had been feeding them in the system for a number of years, like literally going into debt to feed them and pay for their health insurance and pay them so they could live. And they cut me out of the deal. And so it was several $1 million that I should have made based on our agreements. And I was pissed. I was looking at these guys. I was like, you guys are rat bastards and you've stolen from me. And they were taking care of themselves. They didn't care about me at all. But I realized as I was an ATM machine to them. So I told a mentor of mine when this was happening in 2008, 2009, I sat down with him and I was like, okay, I'm out of money. These guys screwed me. He knew all of us. And he said, don't worry, it won't matter. And I was like, how could it not matter? This is millions of dollars. I am literally homeless. I was living in a hotel, with my car and the hotels, and he said, it won't matter. I said, yeah, but it ended up being about $5 million bucks. And he said, it won't matter. And I thought, he's crazy. Like, there's no way. 5 million, hell, 500,000, 50,000 would matter right now. And he's telling me 5 million doesn't matter. He was right. It took a dozen years, but eventually 5 million didn't matter.
It starts with just taking that leap.
Man, you have to work hard. You have to be incredibly smart.
Choose something that even if it fails, you are going to be proud of it.
Doesn't matter how badly you've gone beaten in battle.
Be kind, be kind, be kind.
Become a better person, a better leader, the better business.
Go with your gut.
I'm Samuel Donner, and this is Finding Founders.
Can you state your full name and 3 or 4 sentences about who you are and what you do?
I'm Damion Lupo. I'm a serial entrepreneur that started building businesses from the moment I came out of the womb and have messed up 1,000 things in the process and built a little bit of an empire through the scars and the blood and the trauma. And now we're changing the world.
Yeah, and I mean, so you went from building businesses when you were like 11 years old, selling video games, to building like a multi-million-dollar real estate empire, to have that crashing down in 2008, and now you found a little bit more peace in Yokido, which is a fusion of yoga and Aikido, which we'll talk about in a little bit, spreading that throughout the world. And then, I mean, to what you're doing today with Frame Tech, worth like $500 million, started on a napkin. That's going to be a really exciting thing to jump into. There's a lot to cover here, but let's start at the beginning, to those first businesses at 11 years old. How did you start this little video game business?
Yeah, when I think back, what happened was I was told that we were broke, we didn't have any money, and there was this constant financial pounding around, hey, you know what, here's how much money we make and here's how much our bills are. And it was this very weird shame that I had as a kid. I knew we didn't have much money, but it just felt poor, and it didn't resonate. Like it actually pissed me off as a kid. And I said, I don't like that. Like I want to go figure out how to make money, how to create options. And you know, as kids, you either fight back or you just kind of take it. And I obviously did not take it, which led to a lot of other trouble. And I'm surprised I didn't end up in juvie or something, just because I pushed back on everything. But I actually took the energy of being told no and that we're broke. And I said, all right, you know what, I'm going to figure this out. So back in the day when there was newspapers, this is in the 80s, I went and looked at the ads. People were selling a bunch of Nintendo games. These are like, next phase of Atari after Atari. And I went out and I said, I need to go buy these games. I need to go buy these 20 games. And I would get all these games. My parents would drive me. I paid them, I hired them to drive me out and pick up these games, and I'd play them and then I'd sell them off. And so I was basically buying them wholesale, and then I would sell them off retail after I used them. So it ended up being a really good way to solve the problem of being able to play, to do the things that I wanted to do. And that's really, when I think about my life, it ends up being where if you can think about a problem you have and you can wrap a business around a solution, then it's Like a lot of people just say, well, I'll just write a check and fix something. Well, if you could actually build a business to serve other people, you can end up having your businesses take care of your life, but it has to start from that service thing. And I don't know how much service there is helping people get Nintendo games, but when the market wants something.
Well, what were some of like the first sales that you remember getting? Like how did you even realize that this was a possibility? You know, like I think at 11, you kind of need proof that someone wants something, or like that you could even exchange goods for money. Like this is all like very new concepts. So I'm wondering if you could make it a little bit more concrete and tell me about like that first time that you actually sold one of those games.
You try something and it works, and this is what should happen in business. You don't just say, okay, I'm going to spend a year or two doing something. Ideally, you like building something and having business cards and business plans and offices and everything. You test and see if the market cares. You know, that people have ideas, and what they do one of two things. One, they think something matters, and actually it only matters to them and the market doesn't care. Or they pick something that's so small that it can't scale. And what I noticed when I looked at the classifieds, there were literally dozens and dozens and dozens of people that were selling games, and there were people that were buying games. Like it was an active market. So it scaled from my perspective at 11, it scaled plenty big. Beyond, like going beyond that, if there was 10,000 people, I didn't have the experience or the chops to even engage with it, but it was an opportunity for me to test one or two and then realize, oh, you know what, this is actually real. And so it led to me constantly thinking, is there something real here? So I would always test something and see if there was actually a market, and then is this market big enough for it to be worth my time? I see a lot of people that show up in my world, and they have these ideas, or they present me with an opportunity and they say, I've got this opportunity to make an extra few $1,000s a month. And that was a great idea or a great thought when I was 11. And for some people, it'll change their life until it won't. Meaning you might make an extra $5,000 or $10,000 a month, and that could completely change your life. But ultimately, that's just going to be something. It's going to be a rounding error as you scale, as you grow, as you impact more people. That's just the numbers. Like there are people that do, that consistently 10 or 100 million or $1 billion a year, and that's normal. And so eventually you keep growing and stair stepping on these different levels of success. And that was really the first time I saw that little stair step, and I was like, oh, one game turned into 10, turned into 100. And ultimately, because of that, it was the foundation for me buying a car when I was in high school because of buying and selling video games.
You said you hired your parents at one point?
You hire your parents with gas and pizza. That's how that works when you're a kid. Like you gotta figure out what matters to them, and there's also a strange thing when you're trying to give your parents cash that it's common that it's awkward and they don't want to take it. That did change over the years. There was plenty of cash going towards my parents and not from them, but that's how I basically paid them and said, look, I'll take care of gas, and I'll take you guys out to eat, and so that's how it started. And it was a way for me to have some type of exchange and not just like. Any type of business, you've got to be looking at it realistically, like what are the actual costs involved. And so that's a gentle way to have your 11-year-old paying for the time and energy. I think they were just happy that I was out doing something and not asking them for money anymore.
Yeah. What did your parents think of all this? Were they like proud of you? Did they understand what was going on? Like, what was like the mix of emotions that you got from your parent? Were they positively reinforcing it?
I think that they were. I mean, there was definitely a positive. There was parents seeing kids succeed generally, unless the parents are crazy or sadists, or they want to see their kids fail. And some parents do that because there's an envy and a jealousy. And I went through some of that stuff too, where my success surpassed what my parents had done, especially my dad. But in that time, when I was 11, I think that there was a pride that their kids going out there and figuring things out and making things happen. That was a really healthy space to be in, where they were pretty excited about what I'd been doing and the initiative to come up with it. Dad didn't say, hey, here's what you can do. And I literally went out and had a problem, got irritated, and solved it. So I think that they were very happy. With my mom, she was always happy. She thought I could be a rock and roll star. And I'm like, have you heard me sing? Like, this is not a good plan. But with my dad, I think there was always in the beginning, there was like, okay, I want you to be smart. I want you to be a good, kind of a grinder, like go out there and figure things out. Cause he was always he had like a pawn shop type of thing in the 70s. And so he would buy and sell stuff. So when he saw me doing it, there was probably him going, that's my boy. Like when you see your kids doing something that's where you think you've instilled something, and I probably got stuff from him, just the ideas and the way that he talked and thought, and then I expanded it. But so I think in the beginning there was a lot of pride and a lot of accolades, if you will, for what I was doing.
So you had this early entrepreneurial endeavor, but then you get 14, 15, 16, people start to get more normal-ish jobs. Is that something that was interesting to you or something that you explored? And what was the range of jobs that you explored? Also explored in Alaska, because I imagine the range of jobs in Alaska is a little bit different than maybe in California.
There are jobs in Alaska, like things like slime lines, where people are catching fish in the summer, and you're literally on a line, taking these fish and cutting them apart and pulling the guts out of them. These are that was a job that I couldn't handle. I could barely look at a fish and clean them. I can eat a fish, but I can't really clean one without getting sick. So that was not a job for me. I did other things. So I did the normal jobs. And when I was a freshman in high school, which was only a little while after this, I think I was probably 14, pretty young, and I was working full time in a French restaurant. So I had a normal job. It was not legal because I was working 40 hours a week going to high school. Wow. And so I had a lot of those jobs. I had kind of any job that was available. I was constantly asking, can I work here? I want to make my own money. I want to be able to do my own thing and pave my own way. So every job every restaurant that was out there, and this in addition, I was doing other things like how to paper out. So I'm up at 2:00 in the morning, throwing papers out in the middle of the winter, and it was never enough. I was like, oh, I need to create more. Because there was no option to say, hey, mom, dad, I need some money. I don't remember the last time that actually happened. Probably. I remember 14 years old, I was buying my own my groceries because I felt bad. I felt bad like my parents were, that they couldn't afford food. That was the programming that came into my head. And so instead of being upset about it, I just figured out how to go make money. And then when we went to the grocery store, I'd get my own cart. This is not normal, I don't think. Yeah. You go and you're shopping for your own groceries, and in my room I didn't have common stuff. I had a pantry full of ragu, spaghetti sauce, and all these other things. And so maybe I was the original preteen prepper. I don't know what it was, but I was doing that kind of stuff and becoming, in a lot of ways, autonomous very early. But the only thing I didn't do was leave the house. Although plenty of times I thought about leaving and getting my own place and becoming an emancipated minor. But I was emancipated in the pantry, so that was where I started.
Why did you start to take all these jobs and not just keep selling video games?
There was always an interest in buying and selling things. I think part of it was our interest change. And so there was a phase of video games where I was doing it and I was very interested. So you see this with people in general where there's a business that they do and they don't really care about it. And I've seen that with people that are like chiropractors, and they hate their work, but they do it for the money. And you can kind of tell, and so I think it's important to be interested in the thing. And when my interest in video games waned, I was looking at something that was more interesting.
What were some of the things that you learned from doing all of these jobs? You even worked in an oil field, right? Like these were not easy jobs. These were sometimes it seems like backbreaking almost. What kind of expectations were you coming into those jobs with, and then what was the reality of those jobs?
So there was a job that I remember a little while after that job at the French restaurant, within a year or so. So I was still in high school. I think I was a sophomore, and I took a job at a meat market. And so keep in mind what I shared about the idea of slime lines and cleaning fish, not really my thing. So I took a job at a meat market during game season where people are shooting moose and all sorts of stuff, and they're bringing these animals in to get harvested and cut up into steaks and such. And so I went in there and asked for a job, and they said, yeah, you could be the cleanup boy. And I was like, all right, sounds great. $5 an hour, cash. And I was like, okay, this is perfect. Make $100 a week. And so every day I went in there after school, and I spent several hours. It was 4 hours a day cleaning all of the guts and the gore. And when the sewer backed up, my arm went all the way into the sewer up to my shoulder, and I'm out there pulling, elk guts or whatever. Ugh. So these are disgusting jobs. There's a show called Most Disgusting Jobs. I'm pretty sure that it qualifies, and it was a disgusting thing. And that's clearly something where I was focused on money. wasn't much impact. I wasn't serving much of anything. And one of the most painful parts of that job, because I think I was there for a few months, I had an uncle that came out to visit. I'd never met him. He came up to Alaska one time, and he shows up, and super nice guy, came up, and I didn't even know he existed. And he shows up, and I was busy working, so I'm come home from school and go right to work, and then I see him for a minute, and he was there for about a week, and then he left, and he died 6 months later of cancer. And so I looked back and I said, okay, so that, these lessons, these painful lessons, that $100 that's what I put the value of my time and the ability to connect. Like I literally said, this is more important. $100 is more important. And you don't really know these things. You don't know if somebody's going to die 6 months later. You can't really plan for that. But what you can do is say, okay, you know what, these relationships matter, and I'm not going to just say I don't have time for this. So that was something that haunted me for a long time, and it really helped me to make choices and say, okay, maybe this is the one opportunity I have with this person, or in this environment, or this situation, or this experience, and am I gonna keep working, or you can take that to extremes and go on vacation that 11 months a year, and that's one option. But that was a pretty powerful one, where I remember that $100. It was a $100 bill, and I literally missed out on an opportunity to meet and spend time with somebody that was gone.
So did that experience change how you started showing up to these jobs, or even stop them altogether, or shift focus into thinking about the future in a different way?
It made me think about things probably a little bit later, because it kind of hung around. Like these lessons, sometimes it takes a while for us to actually take the lesson and do something with it. So I went off and I kept grinding away, and in terms of more jobs, like I didn't stop at jobs. I had more jobs, if anything. But one thing that did change, I think probably within a year of that, I started thinking about school different. Like I used to be obsessed with having all A's and like this perfect thing, and that's, you get accolades from parents, from the system. There's honor society. There's all these things that say good job, and that's all I was doing. I was obsessed about memorizing this rote memorization process that really doesn't do anything for anybody, especially with Google these days. But so I was doing that, and I remember in my junior year, I said, you know what, I'm more curious about some other things. So I got heavily involved in student government, and ended up at the state level and the local level. I was on the school board, and my grades went from perfect straight A's to I was like an average student overnight. Like I just didn't care. So the focus wasn't, the grades were interesting, but it was more because my parents were proud, and more because it was relatively easy to do. But it started taking more and more time, and it wasn't that interesting. I didn't really care about some of the stuff that was going on. Like a lot of the educational system, kids are like, this is stupid, this is boring, why are we doing this? A lot of the stuff is kind of useless. And I mean, to be fair, some of the stuff is really important, but there was a shift there, and it was more about what I was curious about. And so I started pursuing those things and making the money, because I was interested in what that would give me, because money is options. I started to realize, you know what, if I have money, I have the ability to take care of my car, and that creates freedom. And so you start going through this process where you realize what money is and what it can be and what its purpose is. And so the jobs were to give me freedom in a lot of ways, and that's been the case my whole life, is money gives you freedom. And whenever I've lost that, it's taken me off in the wrong direction, where I start thinking money is the purpose.
But I think also you can get into a maybe like a thought loop with freedom too, like freedom for freedom's sake, maximize freedom, but then never thinking about what to do with that freedom. Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do with that freedom, or at that stage it was just like as much freedom as possible?
I think I started spending a lot of time focusing on making money and creating this wealth that was in turn freedom, but I wasn't doing a good job at converting it into the actual freedom and being really conscious about the freedom. It was, I'm going to grind and build up more and more, and I did that for a long time, and so I think you're exactly right. You can take anything to extreme. So a great way of looking at that is most people are focused on security over freedom, and they want to have things that are certain. It's one of our basic human needs. And their old mentor of mine said, yeah, you can have all the security in the world. The most security you can have, it's called maximum security prison. Like everything is predictable. And so you can do the same thing with freedom. People that, there's an idea that I live in Sedona in Arizona, and there's a lot of people that are kind of they have a hippie lifestyle and they want to just hang out by the river and they're very free and they can do what they want. And so there's different levels and different ways, the different courses you can go. So it's about harmony, and it's about finding this path to freedom and creation. And so you can definitely take those things into an extreme. And then obviously the money thing, you can take that, you can get obsessed with that and die grinding away, at your desk, making millions or billions of dollars, and you've really never had any freedom.
So I want to go a little bit towards college. And so as you're going to the end of high school, realizing that like freedom is more important, how does that inform what you want to study or what you want to pursue in college? And also, I imagine, like, did college become, like, I guess where you could go become more limited because you weren't focusing as much on grades?
Well, what's interesting about going to college, the first time I went to college, I wanted to be an Air Force pilot. So I went there and spent a year in Oregon. And by the time I got done with a year, like I couldn't help myself. I started a couple of businesses. They didn't go anywhere, but I was pursuing being a fighter pilot. And at the end of the year, they said, your eyes aren't quite right. So you're not going to be able to fly a plane, but you can fly a desk. And I said, I'm out. And that's when I went to work in the oil fields. So I went there going down a track that was really somebody else's track. It was doing the thing. My dad was military, so I was kind of following in that path. And it was still more of the conventional. I'm not very conventional. So I was fighting my natural instincts. I was doing the thing that was safe. I wasn't necessarily doing the thing that was my purpose. And so the grades were important, because if you want to fly a jet, I don't think you can be a C or a D student. Like, you got to do things. And I was busy getting into arguments with economics teachers because I thought that they were idiots, and that really didn't change over the years, because most of them are in a bubble. And that was very frustrating. There were some really incredible things. You expand your mind in college and things, but it was too much in a box. And even when I was 11 years old, I was not good for being in a box. I didn't just think outside the box. I burnt the box down, and I was doing the same thing in college, and so it didn't really work out very well. And I attempted it a few more times over the next few years, and got thrown out of the next college, because there again started a bookstore in my campus.
Yeah, can you tell me about what the start of that looked like how you came up with the idea and what it looked like to start something like that on campus?
So that being in college, one of the things you learn really fast is that books are a scam. You've got these teachers that they write a book and then they rewrite a book, and they have 17 different versions, and they say, well, you have to buy the current version, so they redo it every year or pretty often, and then you're always having to buy these new books. But for maybe a year or two, there's a used book. And so I saw this whole system where you buy a new book for $100, you sell it back for $50, and then you get to rebuy that same book 5 seconds later for $75. And I saw these margins, and part of me was thinking, man, I don't want to pay that kind of outrageous money. But I also thought this is kind of a scam. And when I see scams and monopolies, it bugs me, and I want to fix it. So I can't help myself. I said, all right, what can I do about this? I could start a bookstore. Well, how do I do that? So I convinced the post office on campus to put a flyer in everybody's mailbox about 2 weeks before school ended, and it said, hey, I'm buying books and I'm selling books. All the books you need, just put your list down, like what you want to buy and sell, and give it back to my, put it in my box. So within a week, I had hundreds and hundreds of orders. Like, I basically kind of checked out. In theory, I was studying, but what I was really doing was running logistics, because I didn't have any money. I had very almost nothing. So I couldn't just go give people checks or give them cash. I had to go run across campus to get people's books. Literally, I had to do that right at the end of the semester, because you needed the books to study. So you weren't quite done with them. So it was like during finals week, I'm running around picking up people's books, and then I'd be like, all right, I'll see you in a couple hours or tomorrow, and I'll have money. So I'm picking up books, going to deliver the books somewhere else. And this, keep in mind, this is just me. Like, I'm doing this myself, and I'm running around, and in a matter of a few days, literally less than a week, paid for college. And it was
How much money did you make?
It was probably $10,000-$12,000.
Wow, that's a lot. Especially like in the 90s. Like that's a good, and especially as a college student.
Yeah, I mean, this is where, like, it's carpe diem. You got to seize the day. Whatever the problem is, go after it, and think big. And I mean, this happened, and at the same time, the administration found out, And what it made the bookstore really pissed, because if I made 10 or 12,000, and my margin was like 6% versus 25 to 50%. So bookstore, I mean, they were out 6 figures easy.
They were out 6 figures.
Oh yeah, easily. And so that's where they make their money. That's like the biggest margin for bookstores, not pencils and paper. In fact, they do that as sort of like a bonus. Hey, if we're gonna we'll sell the books or we'll sell the paper and the pencils and the hoodies and everything, as long as we can rape and pillage the populace with these overpriced books. So they put them out of business, and the administration came and said, you got to shut this thing down. And I said, I don't really want to shut it down. It's paying for school. And they said, well, we're going to kick you out. And I said, well, I mean, I guess if that's what's going to happen, it's going to happen. So they said goodbye, and I left, and school was paid for, and I moved on.
Did you think about like continuing the bookstore at all?
You know, there was a thought that this was very cool, but it's also a moment in time. Like sometimes an opportunity happens, and it's like ultimately Amazon took it over that whole space in every way with the books and became way more efficient. So I had the experience there, and I was excited about the next experience. One thing about fast start entrepreneurs is we get oftentimes really excited, and I'm a quick start in general, so I love to do things, and I don't spend years figuring it out. I just go for it, and so I was ready for the next thing, and looking. I mean, this is a little teeny town in New Mexico, and I wanted to hit the big time, and so I moved out to Phoenix and started working at a bank, believe it or not. But there wasn't a whole lot of thought. Like when I was done, I was done. It was
And it seems like you have a strong connection between your interests and business. It's like you were interested in video games when you were 11, so you started a video game business. You were interested in school, or were in school when you were in like the late 90s, and so you started a school-based business. But then once that time period was done, now it's on to the next thing. So when you were out of school, striking out on your own, like why did you get a job at a bank, and also how would that eventually lead to real estate?
So the job at the bank, a friend of mine that I had met when I maybe a year before, he'd got this job at Wells Fargo, and the way that it used to be set up, if he was working in a grocery store, so banks are oftentimes in grocery stores, and the way it used to be, where you're in a grocery store and you go sell credit cards and you sell home equity loans, and it's a commission job, so you have a little teeny base, and then you have this potential to make money. And I mean, he was making like $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a quarter as a bonus. And I'm in college at the time, and I remember thinking, he's telling me what's going on, and I was looking at what I was going to make after three more years of school. I was going to make about $40,000 to $50,000 starting, and he was making that close to every quarter as a bonus. So I started looking at the realities of my path and started to second guess it. And then I said, that seems like a great place to launch into. I can do this. So I went over there and got that job with that expectation. And what's interesting, a lot of businesses do what Wells Fargo did. They have a way to attract top talent that sells a lot of whatever the product or service is. And as soon as those commission people start making more than the C-level people and the middle managers, people start getting all wound up and jealous and envious, and they say that's not fair that little Susie or Bobby is making $200,000 or $300,000 and I've been here 25 years. So they crush the commission people's income potential, which is what they did. Like at the end of the quarter, I was supposed to have a $20,000 bonus, and they said, all right, we've changed the compensation plan. It's now $2,000. And so guess what? All the talent left, and that's where I said, all right, I'm going to go find something else. And I got recruited to sell insurance. So I ended up having an insurance agency, and that was what I did before I did real estate. But it was because that opportunity was taken away in the bank. And I said, all right, well, I don't have any control over this, but I can control what I do next. And so that was initially there was a huge upside, but then it turned into very corporate, like, we're not going to pay people for it. We're not going to do merit-based compensation. We're going to do equity compensation. If you've been here, we're going to make everybody the same. And I was like, probably sounds like our politics today, but I'm much more in favor of meritocracy. You go and you do the thing, you get the results, and that's always been the thing. And if that's taken away, then I'm not interested.
Yeah. So that ended up being a dud. So what did you do after that?
So I started selling insurance, and when I entered that game, so insurance used to be that you could build this book of insurance. And I remember seeing my insurance agent when I was in high school, back up in Alaska, and this guy always had lots of new cars, and he was always on vacation. And I thought, man, that's a cool gig. I don't know how you get that thing, but I had that pitched to me, and I said, this sounds like a cool gig. And there were plenty of people that were making $1 million a year, and I thought that seems like really good income. So I did what they told me to do. I followed along, was calling people, hired a team of people to telemarket, and started building this thing. And it was interesting because I had fun building. Like, that was the first time I actually had a business. I had like 10 employees, and it was, there was a lot of learning that was going on. But I also had a squirrel brain. So I started hearing a friend of mine talk about these books about real estate, and then I started reading some of those books, and I got kind of excited, and I thought, man, I read one of Donald Trump's books back in the late 90s at this time, and I said, there's billions in real estate. How am I ever going to make $1 billion in insurance? Like, I'm going to have to become Geico. And so I said, maybe not. And so he found a deal, and he said, do you want to be my partner? And I went, So I was going to try to do both. I was going to do real estate, and I was going to have an insurance agency. And either I told or my boss or the regional manager found out, and he said, you can't do both. You can't be doing real estate. And because I think a lot of that, they didn't want to have a distraction. They also wanted to keep it very clean. This is who you are. And I said, I'm gone. Like, I'm going to go pursue this thing. And so sold my little book of business. I think I made about $15,000, which is probably how much I owed them from the loan that they give you when you're first starting. They give you a little subsidy, you get to pay it back. So it was like an 18-month experience of learning about insurance. It was kind of like my next college education was in insurance by selling it. And that's where the real estate started in December of 99.
Did you, because like, I think often we are told that having this like shiny object syndrome of going from thing to thing to thing based on what seems like a bigger opportunity is like bad. Like, it's like the rewards go to the person that can be consistent with one thing over a long period of time. Did you have any was that at all in your head of like, oh, like I need to find something that I should stick with for a long period of time? Or was it like you kept seeing all these opportunities and they kept working out decently well, so it's like there's no reason to change?
It was a combination. So when I had my insurance agency, and my insurance agent up in Alaska found out about it, he's like, wait, you actually have an agency? Because I think I was 19. So very young. That's not normal that you give.
Yeah. How old were your peers doing the same thing?
40, 50, 60. Like, I was the teenager, and I was out of control, and it was fun. But when I was doing this and I decided I was moving on, everybody said, you're doing what? You're leaving insurance? Like, it's a golden ticket. It's very, very simple to have a multi-$100,000 income within just a couple of years. It's not that hard. Like, if you do the steps, it's literally a numbers game, and everybody has to have insurance. So, what you're selling, you're going to be able to sell a lot of it if you just do the grind. So it was part of a shiny object. It was like, okay, I'm gonna be Donald Trump, like, the real estate guy, and I was excited about that.
Millions are cool, but billions are cooler, kind of idea.
Billions are better. Like, that was my thinking. Like, it's more is better. So and then that was almost that was basically a quarter century ago. So it's kind of funny. Like, if you do any business and you build it and build it and build it, like an insurance company over 25 years, it's going to be tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions. Like Patrick Bet David is an example of that. You can build it. So sticking with something, I wasn't really ready to stick with anything until real estate, and I stuck with that for a fairly long period of time.
Yeah.
And so part of that was there's a maturity that sometimes happens. Sometimes people just never mature, and you say, okay, I'm going to stick with this thing even when it's hard. And sometimes what I've realized over the years was it's really important to say this isn't working and pull the plug and not just grind along, saying I'm going to keep doing buggies, in carriages, even though this car thing is happening. You got to acknowledge, and right now with technology changing, that's really important, because AI is going to basically obliterate most jobs that are out there that people thought were really safe. And so you have to know when to quit and when to keep pushing. And it's hard, especially when it's the first time. Like this is, I didn't, you don't know, you're just making it up. And then you look back and you're like, oh, that was a good idea to quit. And that was a really stupid idea to quit. So you don't know, but like the shiny thing definitely had to play. Fortunately, when I started real estate in the December of 99 and stuck with that, I was very good at being very narrow in my niche. And I just stayed there and did a ton of the same thing.
So how do you break into real estate? Like what are the first steps in making a living doing that? Because you didn't really have any experience before then, besides reading that one Donald Trump book. So like, how are you thinking about breaking into this new industry?
So there's two ways to do something. Either you learn from your experience or you leverage from somebody else's. And so I did both. The smartest thing I did was I went to a seminar, which it's funny because the first seminar was in January of 2020 or in 2000. So it was like right after I bought this house. This is my very first rental house. I got this thing, and I went out and listened to all these speakers talking about these strategies, and I bought all their tapes. I bought probably $5,000 worth of tapes, put them on my Visa, had to buy an extra suitcase, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do exactly what they said. And I was overloaded with information, and so I just started trying these things, and then whatever worked, I just kept doing it. So I was naive enough to think that what they were telling me was true. And instead of challenging it and saying, well, I'm smarter, or I know better, or my cousin did this and didn't work, I just did what they said. And that's one of the smartest things anybody can do, is find somebody that has been through something and then repeat what they did. So that's what I started doing, and I did it over and over again.
What were the things that you started doing? Like, how did what are the steps?
So when this first rental house, when I said I had no money, I literally didn't have any. So I put this house on my credit card. So I was at the time I was 22, and I didn't have a lot. I had very little money. I mean, we're talking probably $1,000 or $2,000 in cash, just not a lot. And a couple credit cards. And so I took $6,000 out on a credit card as a cash advance and used it for a house. So the question is, how do you buy a house with $6,000? You get creative. You take somebody's idea in a book that says you can take over a mortgage. And so I gave this person like $6,000, and then I took over their mortgage and I owned the house. And then I had to learn about how to become an electrician, a plumber, a roofer, and all these other things. But it was being creative. It was finding a problem where people are trying to sell something. They're trying to sell a house, and they don't have any equity, so they really can't sell it. So I came to him and said, I'll buy it. I'll buy it for what you owe, and I'll give you a little bit of money. And that's how I did probably the first 30 houses.
30 houses. So you kept just doing this and doing this and doing this. And so like, what was the archetype of the person that you were approaching?
So there's going and trying to sell somebody, and then there's marketing. And so I learned, this is where I started learning marketing, where the people in these programs, these seminars, the ones that I bought all their tapes, literally tapes. I'm listening to their tapes, and they're saying, okay, put an ad in the paper, put signs. We call them, they're renegade signs. Like you put the signs on the streets where it says cash for houses. And so I had all these signs all over the place. The cities hated me. They're like, man, this son of a bitch, he's out there putting all this trash everywhere. And then they're constantly chasing me, trying to figure out who I was and where I was. And so I was putting those signs out, had yellow pages. So it was guerrilla marketing. This is like the essence of guerrilla marketing. So I'm doing all that stuff. So people would come to me and they'd say, hey, I want to sell my house. I don't have any equity. I need to move, or I can't afford it, lost my job, or whatever it was. But there was always a motivation, but they were stuck. They couldn't sell it with a real estate agent because they didn't have any equity to pay the commission. So they were absolutely stuck. And I solved the problem. So the avatar was somebody that was motivated to sell and probably had little or no equity. And they didn't have another option. And
they had little or no equity, which meant that they had recently bought the house, and hadn't really put much money to pay off the mortgage, right?
Yeah, and that's very common unless you have a market that's going bananas, where it's going up 10% a year. Most markets are going up, 1, 2, 3% a year, and so you don't have the ability to generally get out of something within a year or two. And that a lot of people had houses, they'd had them for a year or two, and they're like, we got to move, and they didn't have any options. So I was a huge opportunity for them to be able to move on, and so I it was probably about 30 houses doing it that way, and then that led into other houses with investors and things, and it ended up being about 150 houses over the next 5 years.
Wow. Wait, so you own that first house. How do you leverage that into getting another house? Like, and how does that house not just take all of your money with the mortgage and the fixing the roof and the plumbing, and like how do you actually flip that so you can get another property?
So Chase and I became friends. We were partners, like my Visa and I. We were out there at Home Depot 3 times a day, and it was grinding. Like, I didn't know how to do this stuff. So a lot of the cost around houses is with subcontractors and people. And I said, okay, I'm going to figure this out. Instead of paying a plumber $1,000, I was the plumber, and I spent $50 at Home Depot, and then I learned how to do a lot of things. So there was a lot of that, and how do you leverage that into other things? So I would buy these houses, and say it was $6,000. Sometimes it was $1,000. Sometimes people would just give me the house. They'd say, "Will you just promise to make my mortgage?" And I'd say yes. So sometimes it was free, and then I would sell these on to people on a contract. So they would pay me. They'd give me a few $1,000s down, and they'd make monthly payment to me. So it was relatively small margins. I wasn't flipping houses. I was becoming the bank. And that's how I kept scaling it, because there's no limit. You can buy as many houses as you want that way. There's a limit to how many you can buy with the bank. They'll say, we're only going to give you 2 or 3 or 4 loans or whatever. So I didn't have to go through that garbage. I used my brain and the people that had done it. I just listened to them and emulated. So they call it R&D, rip off and duplicate. I literally did a lot of duplicating of what other people had done. And there's a way to do things in business that are not conventional. And you can do it a lot more, a lot faster if you're willing to think and not just say, okay, well, it takes money. Money makes you stupid. And honestly, money makes you very lazy, because you can say, I can just write a check. And that's not really a good idea. You want to use money as a power lever, but not as the thing that allows you to not think or grind.
So it seems like, but I feel like with anything that can expand that fast and like, you could get to 150 houses that quickly, like, it feels like it maybe doesn't have the most stable base, right? Because it's like you're taking on all of these mortgages across all of these houses, leveraging, like you're essentially every time you acquire a house, you're acquiring that mortgage payment, right? So at a certain point, you have to pay all of those mortgages, and or someone, like one of the deals that you do, maybe, like, 'cause it sounded like you said one of the deals you did, they would pay you, and then you would pay off the mortgage. So it's like you eventually, maybe someone doesn't pay, and then like you're out money. And so how did it start to become unstable? Because also this is around the time that we're approaching like 2007, 2008, where things in that house and real estate were getting very unstable.
So there's with real estate, I mean, there's all sorts of things that come up that cost money, that don't go as planned. When I was doing these deals, people would pay me, say, $1,100 a month, and my mortgage was, say, $800. So there's a few $100s of profit. It's cash flow, and that worked out really well. When somebody left, they got evicted, or they just gave me the keys back, and so I got another new person in, and they would give me a down payment, a few $1,000s. And so normally it worked out until some trauma happened to the house. Somebody destroys a wall or something, and then they leave, and the insurance doesn't pay for it. So those were more of the problems. The people leaving, there's always a backlog of people that the banks won't help that want to have a house, and so that really was not a problem, getting people into houses, unless I bought a bad house. That did happen a few times where I'm like, man, this is not a house I want, but I was in. So sometimes I lost money every month just so I could have somebody in there paying part of the mortgage. That process worked really well for the most part. In 2004, which is like 4 years into this, I started seeing a very weird thing. Properties were going up 5-10% a month. And I said, there's absolutely no way that this is going to continue. This is what a bubble looks like. And so I started selling everything off. And so from 2004 to 2005, basically sold off the portfolio. Most of it was like 90+% of it was gone by the end of 2005. Wow. And that would have been a really good thing to say, okay, I did that. But the problem was I thought I was invincible at that point.
Like, from selling all those properties, what did you net from that? Because you had 150 properties. I imagine each one was at least a couple $100,000. So it's like, what are you netting from that?
Part of this process was learning how to create a lot of debt, and meaning not just the mortgages, but finding other mechanisms. So in this process, when things aren't working, and you've got, I mean, there's all sorts of things that happen that you got to pay for, whether it's a house that has a problem that insurance doesn't cover, to lawsuits that happen with tenants. There's all sorts of things, and so there was a lot of money that was owed. There's hundreds of thousands of dollars that was owed. Ultimately, the 150 houses, it netted millions. There was, it was a fun boom. But then one of the things that I learned in that whole process was, if you start making money by selling assets and then you spend that money on fun stuff, you don't have the asset, and your fun stuff ends up depreciating. And so all of a sudden you're like, I got nothing paying me, and I've got no new. So this is a problem, but it's what happens when people start harvesting things, selling their assets, and not reinvesting it. So
yeah. So what happened to you? So you sold all of these things. You're noticing a 5 to 10% increase. And then are you starting to buy like the cars and like the flashy watches and stuff?
That's when I found Ferrari, and Ferrari and I became friends. I'd watched Will Smith and Bad Boys 2, and I saw him driving a Ferrari, and I said, I want that Ferrari. So I bought that Ferrari. And look, when you buy a Ferrari and you're in your 20s, it's never enough. So you got to have other cars. So then I joined a club and had Lamborghinis and Astons and Rolls Royces and all sorts of stuff. And that was because I thought I was super smart, because I'd made some money, and I was too young to understand that things cycle, and that you need to have something else, that you're going to burn up all your assets. And so I learned how to spend a shit ton of money over a couple of years. And in that, it wasn't just spending the money, but then I thought, oh, I'm invincible. I can go, I'll do some more real estate. That'll be fun. But I forgot my lesson that markets were going vertical. They were exploding. And so I thought, oh, no, that won't happen to me. So I ended up buying a bunch of houses and expanding into all sorts of other stuff. This is in like 2006 and 2007. And instead of taking a vacation or just like taking a time out, I went out and I had projects in 7 different markets across the States. And I was thinking that no matter what I did, it was going to make money, and I wasn't doing any type of hedging or any type of thinking. I even forgot what I knew, which was that the market was in a bubble. And that's what led to going off a cliff and losing $25 million.
Wow. What how did things start to go off a cliff? Like, what were like maybe you didn't realize it back then, but what were some of the indicators that you were like that you should have changed what you were doing, now looking back?
So looking back, one of the indicators that you've got a problem is when you're borrowing money on credit cards. Like at one point, I had about $1 million in credit that was used on Visas, MasterCards. And I had houses that I had built or remodeled, in like $1 million houses that weren't selling. And so you start having a lot of carry, a lot of mortgage payments. And I was making all these payments, and I was burning up cash. And then I was like, okay, well, how do I get more cash? Well, I'll ask the bank for more money. And so they would give me expanded credit. And so I kept going down this path. Instead of saying, wait a second, this isn't working, I didn't want to take the medicine. I didn't want to say this was wrong and just take a loss. I was going to punt the can and hope it worked itself out. And so I kept going, and that worked until the credit stopped, until the cash was gone. And then all of a sudden, you can't make payments on mortgages, and foreclosures happen. So I just kept expanding my means of credit. And this is a very dangerous thing that I see a lot of people doing. They don't want to acknowledge reality. So
they don't want to acknowledge something is failing and to scale down. So then that's when they just keep taking on debt.
And taking the medicine, saying, okay, this didn't work. I'm seeing people now in real estate that have invested in apartments, and they're not acknowledging reality. They're pretending that it's just going to fix itself. And I was doing the same thing back then, so it's really obvious to see now. But eventually, you run out of options. And there's a saying that the market can be irrational longer than you can stay liquid. And that was very true. The market was goofy, and it was actually going in the opposite. It wasn't getting better, it was going worse. And I was becoming illiquid faster and faster, and eventually I was totally illiquid.
So what would you have done, like with the knowledge that you have now before you became totally illiquid? What would you have done to get out of that situation now?
Well, one of the ways you get out of things is you don't get into them, and it doesn't mean that you don't do anything. It means that you pick something and you do it. One of the things that I would have done different is I would have chosen something and then narrowly focused on it instead of when I was in 7 different markets. I basically was like an out-of-state landlord. Like I didn't know what was going on. I was developing apartments and condo complexes and remodeling houses in different states and all this stuff going on, and I was just sending checks, wiring money. So narrowing the focus was a huge one, because it's really easy when you, like I had an apartment complex in Memphis, Tennessee that I was remodeling, and there was really nobody there. My business partner was too busy playing in California and didn't really want to go out there. So I'd go out there every once in a while, see a whole lot of commotion with contractors, and thought something was happening. And a year into it and several $1 million of money being put into it, nothing had really changed. It was just a lot of the same units being painted over and over again. And so the biggest mistake was splitting focus and not going deeply narrow into something. It doesn't even matter what it is, just go narrow into that one thing, and you can pay attention to it. And I wasn't paying attention. I was basically having affairs on all of my projects with other projects.
But there's this idea of like, diversification, right? Where you have something that's working in one market, and you take your profit and you move it to an entirely different market. So if something happens in the California real estate market, then you still got Memphis taken care of, right? Which I imagine is maybe a little bit what you were thinking. So like, is there a way that you would have had that diversification still be a part of your like business philosophy, while also like having some level of focus, or is that just impossible to have both those two things?
Diversification is a term that Wall Street basically pitched to everybody to keep their assets spread out all over the place, so people don't really have a focus, and so Wall Street makes a bunch of fees. In reality, I look at it as diversification, and it's when you've got 10 to 20 million or more, being diversified makes sense. When you're launching something and you're in the single millions, it doesn't make sense to be all over the place. There's an idea that you can spread out risk, but you also spread out focus. And I like Warren Buffett's philosophy better. And it's pick a narrow pile of eggs, put it in one basket, and then focus on the damn basket. And that way you're more likely to protect it. Things won't leak. When you have projects that you're building, and it's different than like if I was investing $100,000 into businesses that have people running them all over the place, that would be different than launching businesses, basically an apartment or a condo complex or whatever I'm doing. Those are all businesses that I was effectively launching, and they were relying on me and my efforts and my energy. Well, you can't be in 15 places at once. You can't be in 7 places at once. And mentally, you just run out of juice. And so diversifying is very, very dangerous. I've seen this a lot with doctors. They're good at medicine, and then they go start investing, and they don't know what they're doing, but they start throwing money all over the place, and then they learn a whole lot, and then they have no money. So instead, what it makes more sense is a doctor knows medicine or knows their niche, and then they go invest in things that are aligned with that versus the sexy real estate thing that they have no idea about because they're told this is financial freedom, it's passive income. So staying narrow in your niche and then becoming really good at that thing, that's how you make a dent. Anybody that's doing anything significant, any of my successes have been because I went very, very narrow and stayed focused on that. So I'm not a big fan of diversification until you're well past 8 figures.
Interesting. Going back into reality, we kind of like painted all of these scenarios of what you would do if you went back, and like the things that you would do differently. But you did the things that you did. You bought the Ferrari. You bought, like, had the fancy clothes and the watches and stuff. When did it come? And then you started to become more liquid. What did it look like at the point of illiquidity? Like, what did it look like at the point of $0 in the bank account or negative dollars in the bank account? What do you do at that point? How do you come to terms with reality?
Well, what you can and what you should do, I will tell you that in this process in 2007, 2008, there was about a year period where I had 7 different things that were going on that should have netted me about $1 million each. And each of them netted me negative $1 million or more. Sometimes it was multiple millions. So what that looked like is eventually I ran out of money and I didn't have anything left to be able to, like when my burn rate was like $70,000, $80,000 a month that I was pushing out the door. And there wasn't anything that was really producing money. So I was spinning things, hoping that I would be able to sell things off before it collapsed, and ran out of money and ran out of running out of credit is what happens when you need money. It's kind of like going to a bank. When you have a great idea and no money, they don't want to lend you money. When you have plenty of money, they want to lend you all the money that you don't need. So it's kind of the same thing. You go through this. I went through this process where I needed money, but what I really needed was a dose of reality, and I kept pretending, and eventually what that looked like was I got an $80,000 bill, and there's $15,000 left in my bank accounts, and I got no more credit. Credit cards are maxed out. There's no more equity lines of credit. It all just everything tightened up, and that's happening now too. But so that's what it looked like. And then I said, okay, well, I can't do anything else. And of course, you start telling people, investors, banks, whatever, that there's no more money, and they said, well, you got to figure it out. It's like, I mean, I had one person, and I get it. It's scary and frustrating, but her answer was, well, you just got to go get a bartending job. And I was like, I'm pretty sure bartenders don't make $80,000 a month. So I can't fix this problem. The problem is too big. Like and that's a lot of martinis. I mean, I don't know how many beers that is, but it's 1 billion beers a month. So saying here's what the truth is. How I went through it was, first off, there's a cycle of grief, and so my first step was denying it's even happening. It'll be fine. It's no problem. And then I ran out of money, and I was still doing that, and then all my credit cards got turned off, and I was like, okay, dang. And then my credit went into the toilet. I didn't realize you could have a credit score as low as, I think my credit score was like 450. I was like, I thought you got 500 just for getting your name right, but apparently you don't, and I got demolished, and I couldn't qualify for anything. I had a very, very little money. I was one of the things that I would have gone back and done differently. And I had somebody tell me this. He's like, you guys are making a bunch of money right now. You should put some away. And we're like, why would we do that? Taking money off the table, out of the game. We're making so much money, like we were so smart. And I would have taken some out. And that's a hard lesson when you're like, I had millions, and then I have negative 5 million, and that all happened within 12 months.
Taking some out, like, where do you put it? Because like, you put it in your bank account, your interest is eating away at that. Like, where do you actually put that kind of money to take it off the table in a smart way?
So there's a lot of different places that people can go in, and this is called a lazy balance sheet, where you have stuff, and this is so there's a misconception that if you have money sitting, whether you have let's call it cash, we call it dollars. This money is like gold, but these dollars that are printed into oblivion by the Fed, when you take those things and you put them in a bank account, or it's sitting at your house or whatever, and they're not working, that lazy bank account is called comfort and security and liquidity. And so it's not about taking 100% or 50% of your money, but there's nothing wrong with taking 10 or 15% off the table, and whether it's in cash or whether it's in gold and silver, whether it's in Bitcoin, whether it's in a whole life insurance policy, there's a lot of places you can put it where it's not at risk. It's just literally not. And that's the point that you're saying, okay, I'm good with risking 80-85% of my stuff, but I'm not willing to risk 100%. I was risking like 2,000%. Whatever I had, I'm like, oh, I'll risk 20 times that. That's an even dumber thing. But when you're 10 feet tall and bulletproof, you don't think it matters. You're like, this is good. This is leverage. I'm going to take a home equity loan out of my house and then go bet on the stock market. And people did that in real estate. I watched a lot of people in the last 2 years, and I watched in 2008, including me, taking that money and then going and betting and being wrong. And not only did we lose the money, but we now owed more money, and then you blow up. So that was the process, and then eventually after a year or two, I'm homeless, I'm wandering around and getting fired as a volunteer. Like there's a time where you say, okay, you know what
do you mean homeless? Like you sold the Ferrari, you're out of like the house you were living in, like how do you get to homelessness?
Homelessness means you have a car that I think I owned my car. I think I owned my car free and clear. I did not have the Ferrari. I sold that, and I ended up I was living in my car for a little while. So that's what it looks like. Like you don't have a house, you don't have any income, and you have enough cash for gas and food, and you're in your car with all your possessions, and that's where I was.
Wow. How did that feel? Because I feel like, you know, you had reached the highest heights for in such a short amount of time, and then to be back with nothing, kind of like, I don't know, it feels like you talked about earlier when you know, some of the earliest lessons growing up is like, you know, I don't want to be without money. Like my parents were struggling to put food on the table. Like I never want to be that. And then to be right back there after all those years, and after almost like feels like touching close to generational wealth, and falling back down, like what did you think about yourself, your situation, and what could be done next?
Well, there's a couple of things. One of the things that I learned and realized was that there's a difference between being broke and being poor. My parents were poor. They were also broke. Broke, you have no money. Poor is a mindset. And poor just means this is how I see myself. I don't have wealth. And so there's also people that are broke and they have a rich mindset, but they're delusional because they don't want to go do the work to actually create it. And when I lost this money, I was broke. I was way broke. Like, you know, I was owing millions more than I had, but I wasn't poor. I still saw, there was a part of me that understood that this process was required. When I first started in 99, 2000, somebody said to me, well, how many times have you gone bankrupt? I'm like, I'm not even barely old enough to go bankrupt. He's like, well, when you have 2 or 3 times, come back to me and we can do some business. And I was like, that's so stupid. But I didn't realize that there's a process that you got to go through. You can't be a straight up, you know, perfect winner that you've always just, your rocket's gone up. You got to be like Elon, man. You got to have a bunch of rockets blow up on the way, and then you eventually have your super rocket that works. But a lot of things explode. So in that process, I was like, okay, I am way broke, but I also understood that this was part of that process to create abundance. And one of the things that, as part of the story, I had a partner out in Alabama at the time that he and a couple partners and I were doing stuff in Central America. And I thought that was going to save everything that was falling apart. Well, what happened, as soon as they got a foothold in something, they found a deal to buy an island, and it was a $4 million profit. And I had been feeding them in the system for a number of years, like literally going into debt to feed them and pay for their health insurance and pay them so they could live. And they cut me out of the deal. And so it was several $1 million that I should have made based on our agreements. And I was pissed. I was looking at these guys. I was like, you guys are rat bastards and you've stolen from me. And they were taking care of themselves. They didn't care about me at all. What I realized is I was an ATM machine to them. So I told a mentor of mine when this was happening in 2008, 2009, I sat down with him and I was like, okay, I'm out of money. These guys screwed me. He knew all of us. And he said, don't worry, it won't matter. I was like, how could it not matter? This is millions of dollars. I am literally homeless. You know, I was living in a hotel, with my car and hotels, and he said it won't matter. I said, yeah, but it ended up being about $5 million, and he said it won't matter. And I thought, he's crazy. Like, there's no way. 5 million, hell, 500,000, 50,000 would matter right now, and he's telling me 5 million doesn't matter. He was right. It took a dozen years, but eventually 5 million didn't matter. So there was like this whole process of going through this, being mad, all the emotions, being the homeless. I'll tell you how it felt. It felt cold because I remember I was in Flagstaff and I'd been working. I was drinking wine with a friend of mine, and I didn't want to drive. And I was like, man, shoot, and I really can't afford a hotel right now, so I'll just sleep in the back of my truck. And this is like February. Flagstaff, Arizona in February is at 7,000 feet. It is freaking cold. And I slept in the back of the truck and turned on the gas, or the remote start every 15 minutes, and then he would turn itself off, and I kept doing it. And then I eventually dropped the key in between me and the suitcase that I was sleeping in the back of this truck. And then I was so tired. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning. I woke up at 6, freezing. It was it was like 15 degrees, and I'm shaking, and I'm buried inside of a suitcase. And I mean, my life was a bit of a train wreck. And, it's made for a good story, but it was cold. That's how it felt. Very cold.
Yeah, I can imagine. how did you start to get yourself out of the cold? And also, like, how did like martial arts enter your life, like, or like a little bit before this time? Was that part of your practice? Was that part of like the mental fortitude to like get yourself back on your feet?
The martial arts started the same time I started real estate in 2000, same year. I started getting into that and then went all into it. And so it was running parallel with real estate for about 5 years. And the part of what I think led to the demise or downfall was that I stopped doing the martial arts. I was bouncing around, I was moving around, and that was my center. Like when I was training, that was where I was the calmest and the most focused and the happiest. And so I left that, and I also stopped having mentors. I said, I am the mentor. I'm the smartest one in the room. Also very dumb. So that when I lost those two things, then everything else followed, all the money and everything else. And then on the other side of this loss, where I was trying to find myself, I found martial arts again in Austin. I found somebody that could help me. There was a therapist, coach, worked with him for a couple of years and started doing martial arts with him as well. And so the rebuilding, I found my center again. I found the martial arts, and so started building me and building business again. And it wasn't a straight shot, and things it wasn't like immediate instant, but the martial arts, it was a truth about me and being able to be in that space where I'm super present, and anything that we can find where we're super present and happy and the world disappears is probably a really healthy place to be. So I found that and spent a ton of time there. And it helped me to, like, the way I looked at it, martial arts and business and life were the same thing. And so the way that I was working through conflict, the way that I was working through interactions and relationships in the dojo on the mat was the same as the way I was doing it in business and real life, if you will. They were the exact same thing. So I could practice things hyper fast because I could think about how I was experiencing them in the dojo and how things were happening outside of the dojo. And because I was doing both of those, they were levering off of each other, and the growth was happening really fast. And it allowed me to say, okay, you know what, I'm doing it wrong over here. That's how it was showing up in the dojo or in real life. So it was a great accelerator. And I think you can do that with other things outside of martial arts. But if you don't have a place where you're really present, to where you can understand and you can be thoughtful and observe your thinking about things, there's never really a chance to accelerate the path. You're always sort of on this linear path. And when you find that place of deep presence and observant thinking, it allows you to exponentially move through things literally 10 times faster. And sometimes it's almost like a wormhole. You kind of just surpass, like, jump over time. It's very strange, but I think everybody needs to find a place that's very present. That's where a lot of magic happens.
Yeah. No, I feel like most lessons are applicable across disciplines. Like I think of like I've been skydiving recently and doing my ice bath stuff recently, and like both of those very similar mental states that you have to get into that I think are helpful in business and in relationships, and this idea of like calming your mind to make important decisions, or calming your mind to allow yourself to be fully present, which I think in full presence you make better decisions in general. So couldn't agree more. But going towards digging yourself out, what are some of the things that you started to actually do? What were some of the businesses you did? You also went back to university for a second. Like what were some of the things that you did to like actually functionally get yourself back to a place of security?
So one of the things that I did was I didn't totally learn the lesson around staying focused. So I thought, okay, I need to, when you're in a place of insecurity, you tend to chase things. It's like a really hungry animal in the wild. They'll just chase anything that's moving, or they'll eat anything that might not kill them. And so I was still doing consulting, starting to sell gold and silver. I found retirement accounts that I could help people set up. And so I was doing a bunch of things, and I was making a little money here and there. I was also missing out on the great real estate opportunity that was happening because I was so gun shy around it. I was very, did not want to touch it because that stove was hot. That burned the crap out of me. So I was not touching real estate. And that's where people made a ton of money after 2008. So I was doing these other things, making a few bucks here and there, and also thought it'd be a good time to go back to college and get myself a bachelor's and then a PhD in economics. And for some reason, I thought that'd be a good idea because maybe it would help me if I wanted to go into politics. There was this stupid part of me that thought that was a great idea. I'd learned down the road that probably not where I want to be. But I went back and I thought, okay, this would be a good grounded thing. It'll help me in some way. I thought it wasn't right in 1995 when I first went. It wasn't right when I went a couple years later, but it's right now. So I did that in 2011, and I went back and I was full time at the University of Texas, and I lasted 45 minutes. I lasted one class, and I was sitting in a government class, and I heard this like 26-year-old professor asked the question, what is the purpose of government? And when people started answering, she said, thanks, no. Here's what it is. The purpose of government is to figure out what resources to develop and then how to take those resources and products and things and then how to distribute them amongst the population. And I literally was watching everybody taking notes going, these are the future communist Marxists of America. They were taking this stuff on, and I walked out of this classroom and I said, where the hell am I? I mean, is this Mars? And so I heard a bunch of girls walk by that were like 19-year-old chicken heads. And I said, I'm out of here. This is not the right place for me. I'm forcing something that's somebody else's thing. Like, this is not the right spot. And I said, I need to stay focused on rebuilding me and my business, whatever that's going to be.
And I feel like often when people go to like grad school or go back to school, and this is not always the case, but I think often it's, I don't know what else to do. And so I'm going to put a pause on life and figure out what to do. And it's not necessarily the classes that are sparking the new ideas for your life forward, but it's like giving yourself the space to think about where to launch your life. It is a pause. And it seems like a pause that you didn't need. So what did you do after those 45 minutes?
I called the school and said, I'm out. And they said, this was your first day. And I said, it's my last day as well. And they said, okay. So that was the end of that. And I went back to work. I went back doing the work I was supposed to be doing. And that work was the work on me. I was still working with Frank, my therapist, and training in the martial arts, going deeper into that space and narrowing the focus on the work that I was going to do that would turn into the businesses over the last 10 years. It was, there was a process. I didn't know which thing to pick. So I was picking everything, which means I was picking nothing. It's kind of like, somebody that wants to get married and they're like, I'm going to date 15 people all the time. That is not going to allow you to go very deep. Like, I tried that process, literally dating, 15 people, and guess what? It doesn't work. They all go away. And that was part of what I was learning. I'm not going to get anywhere if I'm doing all these things. It's like if you've ever talked to somebody and you ask them what they do and they give you 15 different things they're doing. You're like, you're not doing anything. You're definitely not making any money. And then when I said, okay, I'm going to narrow this thing down, I'll do one thing, I'll grow that thing, and then things can spawn off back to the diversifying question. Get something really good, get it momentum, give it energy, give it your heart and soul, and grow the people around it. And that's what happened over the next 5 years. It was narrowing the focus and saying no, which is, Sam, it's one of the keys for the difference between successful and ultra successful people. Ultra successful people say no to almost everything. Like, it's automatically no, and if that changes, I'll let you know. But people that say yes, like the Jim Carrey movie, Yes Men, that is not a good strategy for life, because you will be chasing squirrels forever and you'll never really catch anything.
So what were the things that you started to say no to as you developed more of a focus?
It was the opportunities that came up. As an entrepreneur, I see opportunities everywhere. I can't help but go into a restaurant or a bar or anything, and I'm seeing all the things that are missing, all the marketing that's missing, the opportunities for upselling, left selling, and just how to serve people, how to create a better experience. And so I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to say no to these things that are popping up. One of the things that popped up in that time period was the opportunity to sell a juice as part of a network marketing, like an Amway thing. Huh. And I had attempted to open a restaurant, but I got caught in 2008. I was building a restaurant, and that was yet another thing, another shiny object. And halfway through building it, the market collapsed and there was no more money. So I walked away from that and did this network marketing thing. And I went from 0 to 4,000 people below me in this network. So you can imagine with any type of thing where you have 4,000 people that you're getting overrides on.
Wait, you went from 0 to 4,000 people in this. When you say network marketing, is that kind of like an MLM type of thing?
Yeah, multi-level marketing, where you recruit people and they recruit people.
And so you recruited 4,000 people under you?
I had 4,000 people under me in 6 months.
6 months? How?
I recruited everybody. I recruited my family, my friends, my ex-girlfriends, the dog catcher, the pest control people. Like, I recruited everybody. And so what that tells you is that your limits are self-imposed. My limits were, I said, okay, this is what I'm doing. So I did that one thing. And I also learned about what happens when you're not in control, meaning 6 months in, I had created a 6-figure passive income, I thought, for life, and they changed the compensation plan, and it went from 6 figures to about $300 a month. And I said, I'm out. Like, you guys literally just changed and screwed everybody in the system so you could get rich. So that was my short-lived experience. It went vertical and then collapsed.
So what it seems like you learned that if someone else is controlling your compensation package, that then you're kind of screwing yourself over by investing in that ecosystem. What did you do to avoid that in the next business venture that you approach?
If you don't have a direct relationship with people, you literally could have your world shut off in a split second, and it could be an accident or it could be on purpose. So the thinking was, I'm going to do things that I don't have a counterparty risk to, that I can, I'm not going to go into a thing and pour everything in and have somebody else able to just pull the plug or make a decision. So that was part of it. I'm like, I'm not going to go into something where I don't have control. And so that was part of the thinking, and it can keep you really small because for a while I was by myself, and that it's a lot harder to build something by yourself if you just have a mentality that people suck and they're gonna hurt me. And so eventually I got over it. I said, okay, I'm getting killed here. I'm getting burned out. And so I did start growing it, but there was a period where I said, I'm not willing to have the threat of somebody else that gets in my world that can hurt me. And when you get burned, you get scarred, you're going to have that type of reaction. It's just, unless you're psycho, like you're a sociopath and you like pain, that's a natural thing. People that do hurt you, and YouTube or Google or Facebook or whatever, they all have the ability to do it. And sometimes now with technology can change things. The government can change things. There's a million things. So that's one of those risks that should be on everybody's mind. What are the things that can hurt me? And then you mitigate them. Like you're talking about having direct relationships with people. And so the business that really started where I narrowed down the EQRP company, that was a direct relationship with individuals with their retirement accounts, and it was building a relationship. It wasn't selling something for somebody else that could then just pull the plug. I was building a relationship, and that spun into other things. But that's where the focus was. I'm going to help people get control of their retirement money, and I'm going to build a relationship with them around that.
And so that's how the idea started. It's like, I want to have direct relationship with the people that I'm serving, which I didn't have in my multi-level marketing opportunity with the 4,000 people that you literally built a whole business for them, and they screwed you over. So you have this new approach to this new business. How does that start to grow, and what are the initial signs of success that you see in starting that?
Well, the initial process was very exciting, and the initial success was somebody signed up for the thing. So the minimum viable product or person, MVP, showed up, and I said, this is great. But also, again, ran out of money because I wasn't focusing on the selling stuff. I was focusing on all the other stuff, the affogato, which is like an ice cream and espresso. I remember that was like a big focus. Like, how can we make this the perfect coffee drink instead of finding more customers? And so there was a process of going through this for about 18 months, and then literally having to start over again inside that one business where we ran out of money. And what I realized immediately was two choices here. I've run out of money. There's the little team I had is gone because there's no paycheck. And I have to decide if I'm going to quit and go do the next thing, or if I'm going to, there's 132 people that were part of this thing. And I had relationships with them.
Wow.
They all knew me. They met me from when I was speaking on stages, being on podcasts. And I had to decide what's most important to me. And what was most important to me was those 132 people that trusted me. And because I had a direct relationship with them, I said, you know what, I'm going to figure out how to restart this, and I'm going to build this thing, and I'll do it by myself. And I did it by myself for about a year. And it was really all about them versus how am I going to make more money? How am I going to be more successful? So the success it was really the difference between success and fulfillment. There's a fulfilling piece around serving people, and the money and the success becomes a side effect and takes care of itself if you're willing to serve other people like relentlessly and religiously. And that was what happened. It was that focus, and then it started going ballistic. That's when the community really exploded, and it seemed like people said, you're everywhere. Like I was on every podcast and at every stage and sharing what I had. And that there was a relentless focus. It was like Tim Grover's book about being relentless. I mean, it was truly narrowing a focus on something that matters and impacts people. And that's what it was, giving people the opportunity to have a relationship with their money and become financially free with EQRP. That's what my life was all about. I mean, I had no balance. People say, well, what about diversified balance in your life and stuff? I'm like, I didn't have any diversity. I was working. I was on a plane every week. I was flying around. I was grinding. And that's what it took. Not 15 businesses, one thing. And I was obsessed about it. Like I was truly obsessed.
Wow. I want to dial in on this idea of serving first. It's like you said, when you focus on serving people and just doing that well, the money follows. Whereas maybe before you were focusing on the money and then serving people followed as a result of making money. What is, and that, I think that feels like a small distinction, but a really important one. Could you dial in or focus in on some of the decisions that you made, and how you would have made that decision before having this new change of philosophy, and how you would have made that decision after? So it's maybe it's a new opportunity comes that you could make a lot more money, but it screws over some of the people that you're working with. So now you don't take that deal because it's more important to have long-term connection with each of your customers, which actually will serve you economically long-term as well. Are there any decisions like that come up as some examples of that as examples of that new philosophy that you took?
Yeah, it really comes down to one question. The question is, what's in the best interest of this person I'm in a relationship with? And I think the book's called Leaders Eat Last. You really have to ask yourself what's right for them. And then you trust the process that you're either going to take a loss, or you're going to get paid, or you're going to get paid later, or karma is happening. You trust the process instead of saying, okay, the only way you've been in this situation, people watching, listening, have been in situations where you can tell somebody is trying to figure out how to extract as much cash out of your wallet as possible. That's their entire focus. And we can feel it. And what I started doing was having these conversations with people, and they would say, well, sometimes I've had this conversation recently, but back then they would say, well, why should I stay here and not leave? And I'm like, I don't know if you should stay or not. I need to know what's best for you. And they're like, wait, what? I'm like, you might need to leave and go somewhere else and take your money somewhere else. I don't know. And that was a foreign thing for people to hear. And so I stopped making it about me. Back 20 years ago when I was starting out in real estate, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this real estate deal and make $3,000 and $200 a month. Even though it was serving people and providing housing, that was not the obsession. The obsession was, how many cash flowing houses can I make? Can I create in my portfolio? Now there's this obsession around how many people can I impact, and so here's the trick on that. You have to have something. You have to have a big enough vision and a mission with enough people, because if you go, I'm going to help my neighbor and I'm going to help them mow the lawn and I should be rich. Well, the problem is there's not enough impact. It's impactful to one person, but you got to think about, we all have the capability to think big. There's a great book, I think the guy's name is Schwartz, about thinking big. and there's a lot of books about thinking big. But the reality is we have the choice. If you're going to think, you may as well think big. Like, it's a lot, the same energy, you just pick one, bigger impact. Money takes care of itself if you're living up to your potential, and that's where people miss it. They're like, I'm going to do the thing that's easy. And Jim Rohn talked about this years ago, in one of my early seminars, and listened to his stuff until I burned the tapes up. And he's like, look, 9 to 5 is how you make a living. Everything after that and the weekends, that's how you're creating a legacy in a life. And so it's the obsession around how many people, like, what can I dream up and then go build? So you've got to have this service mindset, and you've got to have a builder mindset. We're all meant to be ants in a certain way, building families, building communities, building businesses. So that's what it got narrowed down to. Before, it was about building my own damn cash flow, which is not why God put me on this planet. Like, that was not my mission. But it was because I was delusional, young and naive, and I was like, good hedonist, as every 20-something male in America tends to be, or a lot of them. So that's what the switch was. It was focusing and trusting, focusing on other people. What do they need? What are their problems? Solve their problems. Like my Nintendo problem. Look, if the world could have peace, if there was more Nintendo game buying and selling, I'd probably go into that business. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to solve big problems, housing crises, people being ripped off by Wall Street. Like, that's why I'm here, to create more freedoms, to give people options so they're not stuck in financial prison.
So what was the outcome, leading up to 2020 of building this business up?
So there was a run for several years up to 2020. And 2020 was interesting because it was a very weird year with the COVID stuff that blew up. And it was also the busiest year that I've ever had in the EQRP company, because interestingly enough, governments do things, there's unintended consequences. And so a lot of people were able to start using their retirement accounts for things like real estate and Bitcoin and gold, and they got excited. And so that really grew. And because the community was at a point with, I think at that point it was probably about 1,500 people, there was a lot of relationship. And so my business partner and I started thinking, we were on a ski trip, and by the way, this is a great thing to do, get into a different environment and think in that different environment about life, because you start coming up with ideas. So we were on a chairlift, and we thought, we've given people control of their money, but a lot of them are still trying to figure out what to do with it. And so we decided to start creating some opportunities and finding ways for people to be able to invest. And so all these things developed. This was not like a strategic plan over a 10-year period. It's just like it was the next thing. And we went, what are people missing? Back to, how do you impact people? What are people telling us that their problem is, and can we help them solve that? And that's what we did starting in 2020. And that's over the last 5 years almost. We've gotten to a point where we've served people with hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, finding a home in different investments. And that was the same problem, serving people, helping them become more financially free. So it's the same mission. You don't have to get obsessed about the one thing, like the tactical piece. It's about the visionary piece. You get focused on that, and then you find the little tactical pieces. And I was obsessed about the tactical back in 2000, where it was the house. Instead of, okay, what the hell's the mission? What's the big thing here that's going to move the dial on peace and prosperity and love and connection? I was focused on how much money per month is a house giving me. That's a very different world. It's the opposite today.
I want to move now into what you're doing today with Frame Tech, which apparently started as a napkin, now worth over like $500 million. But how did it actually start? What was the napkin that started it all? And how did you lead up to that point where you were ready to start another company if you were, EQRP was doing so well and serving so many people?
So part of what happened is as things grew and they evolved, there were more people. There were people that were running things. So there was a team around EQRP, and it wasn't just me. And so there's a natural ability to be able to say, okay, what's the next thing? And there's also a point where you say, if you're honest, am I still the right person to be doing the thing with this company? Because companies grow, and people with the skill set to start the company, maybe not the same person that should be growing it after a certain point. So in 2020, we launched this thing called the M&M Fund, and we actually just closed it out this last week. So 4.5 years in, and everybody made a profit. And that was the first of, I think it was 7 different investment funds that we did. And so each one of those built on each other. So some were really interesting and awesome, and others were not. They didn't go like we thought they were. So we ended up with Frame Tech because we had done some other stuff. So we had some experience, and we had some people that sort of all came together after different people knew each other over a period of 30 years. And an old friend of mine said, "Hey, I've got this thing I want to show you." And I said, "Great." He flew to Dallas, handed me this pile of papers and said, "It's a great deal." And I said, "Awesome." And I said, "I'm really busy." And I ignored it for 6 months. So that was the end of 2021. And my partner and I looked at this thing in the spring of 22, and we said, "There's something wrong with this deal. Something is off. Like, it can't be this good." So we said, "All right, well, we must be missing something. We should go talk to these guys." So we flew out to Arizona and sat down, and literally about 5 miles from where I'm sitting right now, and had this 2-hour meeting with these guys. And they told us about their vision of disrupting the construction industry and solving the housing crisis. And we said, "That's very cool. It's very bold. What gives? What are we missing here?" And they said, "Well, we're missing about $40 million. That's what we need to build this thing." And we said, "Okay, well, you know what? We like this idea. We really like you guys, and we believe that you're telling the truth. So let's do this." And so we committed. We said, we're gonna bring this money to make this happen. And we got with our community and shared the idea and told them how exciting it is and how.
And could you tell me a little bit what was the pitch to the community that you shared? Like, how did you share it, and what was the community's response?
So we said we're doing 2 things. We're going to disrupt the construction industry, and we're going to solve the housing crisis. Like, houses are more expensive, and we need millions of them. And this particular idea is a way to accelerate that production. It's to bring more production in for framing houses and apartments in America, and we can be part of that solution. And so people said, we like the idea. The returns looked really good, but you can make any investment look like it's going to do well. The question is, can you execute? But I mean, this looked really good. And we said, we're going to put millions of our own dollars in this thing, and we'd love to have you join us. And they said, "You know what? We want to do it." And there's about 400 investors right now in this whole enterprise. And they said, "Yeah, we like the idea. We trust you guys. We see the vision. And so we want to be a part of it." And that's really what it came down to. And people often ask me about how do you raise money? How do you bring things? How do you fund something? And I say, you build a community. You build a community, and you show them over and over who you are so they can trust you. And it's not hard. But if you don't have the relationship, it's impossible, because then you're always selling people. All we said was, we see this vision, and we're excited about it, and we're going all in on it. And so people said, we're in too. And that's really what it came down to. But the problem for most people is they don't have a relationship, and you can't build a relationship in 15 minutes. It takes years. So that's how it launched, where people said, we want to be a part of this, and we funded it, and it just started producing.
Wow.
Last week was our first housing that was
way.
built. Yeah.
Congrats, that's huge. So what has the last 2 years looked like for Frame Tech? Like, what have you been working on? What are the signs of things actually working as well? And what are what's like the overall mission that you want to have like accomplished in the next few years?
So the last couple of years has been a whole lot of learning, because you have this idea and that's never been built before, and our process is patented. So we watched for 2 years a whole lot of things happen that we didn't expect. One, things they cost 50% or 100% more than you thought, and you go, okay. Our original process, we expected we'd be online in about 2 years, and we're right on schedule. So that's unusual. Normally, a process of building a plant like this would take about 4 years. We did it in 2. Wow. So that's incredible. What I've learned even more so is that the team, you don't even want A- players, let alone B and C's. You got to have A+, triple plus. Like, you got to have people that are hyper, that are thinking about this, dreaming about it, sleeping about it. It's what they're literally bleeding the thing. So I've watched the people show up now, the culture, and really from the beginning, but it's very obvious with the people that are there. This is what matters. Like, they're we have people that come in and bring their kids on the weekends, and they're working there and cleaning the place, and like it's wild watching the level of commitment. So we've learned, one, that if something's going to be successful, you have to have incredibly smart people that are grinding and have the experience to do something and care about it enough, because it's not a straight line. There's a lot of things that we tripped over, and we're like, okay, we got to fix this, and it's been hard because we've got equipment being built all over the world that's being shipped in here, and so you have a million things that can happen. A boat could sink in the Atlantic. You could have a currency collapse because you're buying in Sweden or Germany. Like, there's all these things, and you also realize that 2 years goes by in a heartbeat, and so there's a patience. Like, one of the things I've noticed, Sam, is that I've heard people say, well, I can't wait until we're done. I can't wait until this thing's producing, and it always rubs me the wrong way, because there's this joy in building something, and it's like people have kids, and it's not just, hey, I can't wait till my kid gets out of college. Like, they're born, you actually enjoy the process, or you go, whoa, I missed the whole process, and that's where all the fun is. And so it's been like a huge personal development program for everybody. We're all growing and learning in this thing, and then we get to bring 400 people along with us that are part of this, that we couldn't have done this without them. That's been one of the coolest things to know, and for them to know that it was a giant family outing. Like, we had to build this picnic together, and we're all celebrating together, and hundreds of them are coming out here in late October to see basically the grand opening as we're producing, and all our robots dancing. And it's been hard. It is hard to build something at this scale. I mean, the thing is 112,000 feet under a roof. It's incredibly complex, and it's deeply fulfilling. The harder something is, oftentimes the more fulfilling it is. So just going out there and making money on something is really not why we're here. And I've said that a million times, but if somebody said, well, this is going to be really easy, one, I'd say you're full of baloney. And two, it's just not that interesting, because if it's easy, what's the point? Like, I want something that's challenging. I want something stimulating. I want something that matters to people. And we need things that are harder. Easier stuff is all kind of taken up. Like, we don't need any more people doing easy stuff. We need people doing the hard stuff.
So looking back at your whole story, starting from 11 years old, selling video games, to then getting into real estate, to losing it all, to building it back, to helping people take control of their finances, to now solving the housing crisis at a large scale. It seems like you've been approaching scope, or like you've been approaching problems with a larger and larger scope, or approaching higher scope problems. But I imagine there is a thread of unity throughout all those projects that have been successful. And I guess what do you feel like stays the same as you increase the scope of the projects that you're working on, in terms of mindset? And what are some things that you would maybe tell a younger version of yourself that if you were to change that younger version of yourself's mindset in some way, or would ask them to apply something, what kind of piece of advice would you give them?
I think trusting in the process and trusting other people, especially the process, is one of the most important things ever. To not get too wound up about the day-to-day, and so there's this thread where I've been the happiest when I'm engaged in something and trusting it and not trying to get out of it. What I love is the depth of the relationships as something is being built and we're growing together. One thing that I'm very certain around is people can change. If you'd have met me 20 years ago, you'd be like, that guy's a douchebag. And so I know that it's possible to change and become better. I'm always open to the us evolving. So that's what I've learned, that this thing is helping me find me, like the potential of me. And so that's why I keep pushing it and grinding and going. I'm like, there is more for me to evolve into and for the world than what I'm doing now. This is a step on that process. It's not to get out of it, it's to continue going through it. And that's why I'm here, and I'll figure it all out, I think, at the end. But until then, I'm going to stay in the process, trust the process, and be incredibly grateful for the process, whether it's raining or sunny, or doesn't make any difference. Every day that I get to be a part of it is a gift.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much for coming on.
This is awesome, Sam. Thanks so much for having me.